everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today it is getting close to Valentine's Day. I don't know exactly when this is going to be going up, but love is in the air, and so I can't think of a better time to talk about love and emotions in BDSM relationships. Now today I'm not going to be covering things like, do you have to be in love in order to have a healthy BDSM relationship, or if it's okay to love your dom, or if it's just supposed to be strictly platonic, because I actually already did a video on that last year around the same time. So if you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend you check it out. A link to it will be down below. No, what I want to cover today is a little bit more specific. What I want to talk about is how to handle when you catch feelings in a kink dynamic, especially when maybe you're not supposed to. This is a question I've been getting more and more frequently over the last year or so. It's always interesting to see how my questions change over time, and I've had so many people who ask me, hey Evie, I negotiated this relationship and it was supposed to be no strings attached, but I think I might be getting feelings for them. Or, hey Evie, I've been in this power exchange relationship that's purely platonic for years, and I think I might actually be secretly in love with my dom. What do I do? And relationships are complex. I can't necessarily solve those issues just here in one video without having a conversation with you, because BDSM relationships, once again, are not one size fits all. They are entirely bespoke. They are handcrafted by the people who choose to be in them. For some people, that means they upcycle their relationship from a vanilla one to a kink one, maintaining an existing romantic or sexual connection. Other people enter into kink specifically hoping for a relationship that will be as much a vanilla dating romance-based relationship as a BDSM one, and other people decide that, maybe they have existing romantic or sexual relationships with other people. They want this one to just purely be BDSM, or for whatever reason, they want something that's no strings attached, no friends only, nothing else outside of the kink-focused part of the dynamic. And that does work for a lot of people. I know people that have relationships that are built around that do last very well. And this can also be for play partnerships as well as for power exchange dynamics. But there are some pitfalls that go into this relationship style that maybe aren't present with having something that does involve sex or romance as an active component of it. And namely, just because you negotiate for something that isn't going to involve feelings doesn't mean that's always what's going to end up happening. And I think the first step here, if this is something you're going through, is to just acknowledge that that development of feelings has started to occur. And I say acknowledge here because acknowledging doesn't mean acting on it. Just because you recognize you have a feeling doesn't mean you have to do anything with it, doesn't mean you have to do anything about it yet. It's just going, hey, I have that feeling. Like, you don't act out every single emotion you have during the whole day, because otherwise life would be way more hectic than it has to be. So I think the same thing can definitely apply here, where you just have to recognize the feelings. And I think that's important because that then allows you to think more deeply about the origin of those feelings, the nature of those feelings, and then from there you can more actively and more consciously decide how you want to deal with them. And I think when it comes to the development of feelings in a relationship where they're not necessarily welcome, that can fall into three broad categories. Now, I am sure there are things I am leaving out or forgetting, so feel free to add more in the comment section down below. But how I see it, there are three categories. And those three categories would be scene highs, infatuation, and then actual genuine feelings. So let's talk about the first one, having a scene high. Do these feelings seem to be directly in response to something being done or said during a scene or in the power exchange dynamic, such as, for example, being called a good girl or a good boy on a regular basis, or another term of endearment that really just clicks in your brain? Do these feelings immediately show up during or after a scene, or while in aftercare? If that's what you're experiencing, I think the best way to classify your feelings would be as a scene high. We usually think of scene highs as being the very physical body feelings that we have after we engage in play, where we're just feeling so light and wonderful and our bodies just feel so warm and amazing. But we can also have scene highs that affect our emotions and our mental state as well. The good news is that these are so closely connected to certain activities that once those activities stop, those feelings should go away relatively quickly within maybe a couple of days. However, the bad news is that if you play together frequently, it may get difficult to decide where does the scene high end and where does the actual infatuation and develop of long-lasting feelings begin. Because if your scene high lasts for 2 or 3 days, and then you play together again in another 2 or 3 days, you might just be in a situation where you're going from scene high to scene high, and that can be a little bit more difficult to work through. And this can also be the case even if you don't play together super frequently, if you just happen to have the sort of brain chemistry where your scene highs will last for a lot longer, or maybe they don't even start to happen immediately after the scene and they don't become apparent until a couple of days later. And that can make it really difficult to tell, okay, where is just the feel-good injection in my brain from doing BDSM stuff happening versus the actual development of real feelings. And I honestly think the easiest way to test for this is to just take a break from play for a couple of days. If you maybe have a schedule where you play together once a week or twice a week, maybe cut that in half. Give yourself a little bit of extra time off, and then you should be able to tell, okay, I haven't played with this person for a while, we haven't really been around each other. Are these feelings still there, or are they starting to go away? Is there a time period where you go back to like a normal evaluation of this person as opposed to bouncing back and forth between being like, oh my god, they're amazing and I want to devote my whole life to them, versus like, I really like being Bob's friend. And if you find that you were able to go back to a state where you have maybe a more even rational evaluation of the person, it's just like, yeah, I like being friends with them, I like hanging out with them, but I don't see like changing my whole life to be with them. That can kind of give you an indication that, okay, this is really a scene high thing and these feelings are more temporary. I think if your feelings fall more into this category where it's just a temporary change in perspective after a scene or after certain things that you do as part of your BDSM relationship with this person, there's not necessarily a reason to bring it up if you think that would make things unnecessarily awkward or complicated. However, the exception for this is if it starts to impact your ability to negotiate or to fully establish your limits and boundaries appropriately. Especially if you are doing a lot of scenes back to back, you might want to tell your partner, hey, if we're going to negotiate for another scene, I might want to wait another couple of days because just after a scene, when I'm still feeling those after effects, I might not be fully communicating to you accurately what my true limits and boundaries are. And that might take a little bit of troubleshooting to work through to figure out exactly when is a good timeline for you. Maybe for you, you need like 3 days after a scene before you're ready to negotiate again. Or maybe you need a week, or 2 weeks, or a month. It all just depends. It's probably not going to be a month though. It's probably going to be a couple days, so don't worry too much. I'm not saying you're never going to be able to play again, but it's going to take a little bit of finesse to figure out exactly where that is for you to make sure that you are negotiating things that long-term you is going to be okay with. And obviously, if these feelings are brought on by specific words or phrases or actions that you normally do in your encounters together, maybe reduce them or change what you're doing to not include them as frequently anymore, or just get rid of them entirely if it's too much of a problem. So like if for some reason your brain reads being called a good girl as instantly going to fall in puppy love with this person, maybe that means that this isn't a relationship where it's appropriate to use that phrase, and you can work through an alternative to use together. Number 2, again, is infatuation. Infatuation is like the pernicious older sibling of a scene high. Rather than just being something that lasts for a short while and is probably going to go away relatively quickly, infatuation doesn't quite operate the same way. This can last for longer. It can be even harder to tell what it is apart from other emotions. Like, Is it an infatuation? Is it a scene high? Is it a genuine feeling? It can be really hard because it can sit in the middle between all of the other options out there. The way I would describe infatuation is as an obsessive, overly strong fascination and feeling for another person. It's that stage where you never ever want to be without this person. You simply cannot imagine being apart from them. It is literally physically painful for you to not be with them and not be close with them often enough. And you just think of them as the most perfect, awesome person in the world, and they are just so amazing, and you just want to spend all your time with them. You're constantly thinking about them, like you were literally obsessed with this person or the idea of being with them or the idea of doing another scene with them. It's the sort of feeling that develops in a not entirely rational way. It's what you're in before you really get to truly deeply know someone. And you might think that they're perfect. You might have a lot of euphoria and excitement because they just seem so fabulous and wonderful, but you haven't yet had the grounding of truly understanding who this person is at their core, the things that you don't like about them, the things that you disagree on, because no matter how awesome someone is, they will have flaws. They will not be perfect. And infatuation is that time period when you haven't necessarily realized yet that they're not perfect people. And this is the part of the video where I get to go on a diatribe about how important it is that we recognize that bonding in BDSM relationships, the things that we play with in scenes, are powerful and should not be underestimated. I think we spend a lot of time talking about the physical risks of BDSM, how important it is to know that, whips can do this and rope has these things that can happen and, understanding all of that, but we don't necessarily talk about what can happen in a relationship when you start to add BDSM into the mix. And it doesn't matter what your kink is. It could be rope, it could be CGL, it could be service, it could be pet play, it could be latex. It doesn't matter. If you're doing BDSM scenes, if you have a dynamic, all of that involves elements of trust and vulnerability and honesty and rawness, things that we don't necessarily get to experience in our everyday lives, and that can be a really powerful bonding force. You add that to the things that we actually physically do in scenes that pump all of those feel-good chemicals into our brain, and that can make such a strong association with someone, And even if it doesn't go that far, it's still a very strong bonding force. And sometimes that bond does stay purely platonic. It just means that you have a lot of devotion and loyalty to that person. You really want to be good friends with them. You want to maintain a connection with them in your life. For other people, though, that bonding can look like developing unexpected sexual urges for someone, or visualizing romantic encounters with them that they would have never done at the start of the relationship. And so it's no wonder if we're taking, again, those elements of trust, vulnerability, we're taking those elements of intense BDSM play, maybe things that we only do with that person, maybe the only person we have in our life that we can be 100% honest around, the only person we can be 100% ourselves with. It is not a surprise to me that it is really difficult to truly stay no strings attached to someone in that environment. And so I think it's really important that we evaluate this kind of potential for emotional bonding as a risk of the things that we choose to engage in the same way that we evaluate risk for nerve damage and rope bondage or leaving marks in impact play. It's different. It's not something a lot of us think about when we negotiate for scenes, but especially if you're starting to go into even just a regular play partner relationship, it's something that should be talked about so everyone understands what is going to happen in the relationship should those feelings develop, developing some kind of plan for communicating about that, just so everything is going to be so much easier to handle versus just going, feelings, we have control over those would never happen to us, we're gonna pinky promise, we're just not gonna catch feelings. That's not really a plan that works. It can work. It does happen, but it's not going to work for everyone, and I think it is ignorant to assume that we can control our feelings to that extent when we are just giving our brains so many signals to the contrary. Alright, now we're on to number 3, which is the final category, actual genuine attraction. And this one can be, in particular, difficult to differentiate from infatuation because one is often a part of another. Many of us have true lasting feelings that do start out being infatuation first. So not every relationship will get to this stage. Not every instance of puppy love will grow into actual genuine feelings, but it can, and that is why it is so difficult to understand where that difference is. Now, when I think of actual genuine attraction, I tend to think about it as something that takes time to develop, something that is the result of truly getting to know someone on a deeper level. And so if you've been in a relationship for, say, less than half a year, maybe less than like 4 or 5 months, depending on how intense the relationship is, I would probably say it's unlikely you've gotten to this stage, because even very intense, like vanilla romantic entanglements can sometimes seem like true love, but then actually when you look on them in the past, it was really just puppy love, and it wasn't actually something that was based on a more mature concept of wanting to be with someone and having a deep affection for them. So assuming that that criteria of time hasn't immediately eliminated this possibility because you've only known each other for 2 weeks, I am going to say this is something that is probably most likely to happen in longer term power exchange dynamics or in longer term play partner relationships. You've had some amazing times as well as frustrating times. You've really gotten to know each other inside and out. You know their quirks. You understand your likes and your dislikes and how they relate to their likes and their dislikes. And you've had deep conversations and you've really gotten to know them as a person, not just an idea of who they might be in your head. And I think that's really how you can tell the difference between merely infatuation versus actual genuine attraction. I think this is something that is more mature, it's slow to develop, and it's more grounded in reality as opposed to being overzealous and overenthusiastic and burning very quickly. It's like the difference between a slow, warm, kind of coal fire that's slow and simmering, as opposed to like just a pillar of raw flame that's going to burn itself out very quickly. And this is something that can develop in numerous ways. So you might have something where you were friends at first, but then over the time of just doing BDSM together, of being more intimate with each other, those feelings have changed from friendship into something that more looks like romantic desire. Or maybe you think about doing something a little bit more after the scene was over. Or maybe you wish that you could have something beyond just the scenes that you do. But whatever the origin of the feeling, however it's developed, it is something that sticks around. It's not something that just goes away after a scene. It's not something that even goes away if you haven't talked to them for a couple of days or weeks, maybe even months if you've known each other for a very long time. It's something that has duration to it. And figuring it out besides that is kind of just intuition. A lot of times we don't even necessarily realize that we have genuine feelings for someone until we look back on it in order to differentiate it from just merely having a crush. But if you've gotten to this point and you've negotiated for a relationship that was purely supposed to be just friends only, it can be really scary. You might not know what to do because though you have deeper feelings for this person, you don't want to ruin what you already have, and you might rather have just a friend as opposed to not having anyone at all. And that's exactly why I think it's so important that we address the possibility for this to happen before we actually enter into these relationships during the negotiation process. So rather than leaving somebody scared and afraid and unable to fully express their emotions, they know that there is something that they've already talked about, like, hey, we've already talked about the possibility of what happens when we develop feelings. There's already a plan in place, so that way you are more prepared to handle things if something does unexpectedly get to this point. And that leads me to part 2 of this discussion, which is how you actually address it if this does happen. And how the heck do you tell someone you have feelings for them? It is nerve-wracking, it is stress-inducing, it is horrifying to think of having to admit to someone that you secretly have had a crush on them for months or maybe even years because you don't necessarily know if they're going to return those feelings to you or how they're going to respond to it. No, I can't tell you exactly what to say or how to say it because you know your own dynamic best. But I might think of phrasing something a little bit like this. You know, hey, so-and-so, I really enjoy our scenes. I really enjoy the power exchange dynamic that we have and the time that we've chosen to spend together. I understand that we negotiated for a relationship that is supposed to be just friends only, but I think I might have feelings that are moving in a different direction. Are you able to talk about that now? And then you can have a conversation about what that means for you, what that means for them, what that means for your relationship, and how you want to handle things moving forward. And from there, you might decide that you want to take a break from play for a while because you want to be able to more rationally evaluate your feelings. You might decide you want to put your power exchange relationship on hold or change a couple of your rules. You might decide you want to take your relationship in an entirely different direction from what you were doing before, or maybe they even share your feelings. The important part is that you shared your feelings, you were honest, and now you can actually move forward with the rest of the relationship as opposed to just keeping it buried inside and just hoping that something different will happen even though you're still doing the exact same thing. Now, obviously, the next question is, but Evie, what if I don't ever want to have feelings? Isn't there some way I can prevent myself from ever getting into the situation in the first place? And I don't want to say that that's impossible, but I do think we need to approach this from a more rational perspective than what we currently do. I think right now what we think is like, oh yeah, feelings, we totally have control over those, and our feelings would never betray us and cause us to think things that would make us uncomfortable, or we can just ignore our feelings and bury them down, and if we just leave them there, then they won't, grow or blossom, and then if we just ignore them, they're not real, and that is not really helpful. And I think even worse than that is when we pretend that feelings don't exist, and that just don't even worry about it because they never happen. That's not even a possibility. It is a possibility. Even if you think right now in the moment, oh, I'd never catch feelings for this person. Remember, dumping all of those powerful brain chemicals in our brains and the sheer fact that spending time together itself is bonding for humans and all of the vulnerability and trust that goes into building a BDSM dynamic is the same thing that goes into building a long-term romantic and sexual dynamic as well. Yeah, you might think right now, before you really even know someone, that you never, ever, ever catch feelings for them. But you have to acknowledge there's a 1% chance, there's a 5% chance, there is a chance of some kind that those feelings could be there. But if what you want to do is just minimize the risk of catching feelings, I do think that's something that is a possibility. One, again, is acknowledging that it can happen. Two would be to not engage in play that's too intense or too powerful or too emotional for you, because that is going to increase the bonding factor. What that means, obviously, is subjective, so you'll have to look at your own play preferences and what you normally like to engage in for that one. You can also take longer breaks between when you play and you see each other to make sure that your brain is evaluating who this person is rationally as opposed to relying on scene high brain whenever you are thinking about this person. You can also choose to be circumspect with the power exchange you choose to engage in, whether that be in a scene or as part of a larger dynamic. I think the biggest risk when it comes to power exchange and catching the feelings is S-types sort of idolizing their D-types and being like, oh my gosh, they're the most amazing master of all time, and I just can't wait to be their footstool for all of the rest of eternity. When I die, I hope they make my bones into a footstool so I can continue to serve them beyond death. And the feelings are just so intense sometimes when it comes to power exchange. I think it's worth, being really cautious, taking it slow as you would in the beginning of any relationship, and just choosing the things that you are doing very thoughtfully to make sure you don't get to that point where you're like worshiping the very ground that they walk on and that they are just the most perfect human being ever on the whole planet. Because with that fawning, I think that will oftentimes go with romantic or sexual inclinations for a lot of people. For some people, it's just that, and they like having a dynamic framework that's kind of focused on the worship and reverence for their partner. And if you know from experience that you can negotiate for that and maintain that in a platonic direction, that is great. But I think for a lot of people, that will also go along with deeper feelings. And if you're not supposed to have those, then obviously you want to avoid things that are more likely to make that happen. And yeah, that's basically the advice that I have for trying to keep feelings from happening. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like you're completely a slave to your emotions and your feelings and there's absolutely no way that you can control them. I just more think that people already assume that they can completely control their emotions. And so I'm trying to more argue from the perspective that you can't, and it's important to acknowledge that sometimes things will happen that you might not necessarily be expecting or wanting, and it's better to have a plan for if those things do happen versus just assuming that will never be the case. Now, I want to end this episode, this video, just with one little note, because there was one term that I kept seeing when I was researching for this video, and that was BDSM is trauma bonding. And I just want to acknowledge that that exists and is an idea that's out there for why feelings develop in BDSM relationships is it's trauma bonding. And I don't have time to go into that in this video, so I will be making a follow-up where I address it more fully, and be on the lookout for that. So if you want to see that video, if you don't want to miss out on it, please make sure you are subscribed and you have that notification bell turned on, because that will make it so much easier for you to be able to catch all of these wonderful videos. If you like this, if you want to support my channel, the best way you can do that is on Patreon. That's what makes all of this possible, and that's what allows me to also do extra videos that go into things that I can't cover here on YouTube. There is a Discord chat, there is Fat Life access, there are photo shoots, there are lots of fun things over there, so if you haven't checked that out already, please do. Link to that will be down in the description box below, and if you already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me, and until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.